Hello, it's Dr. Courtney Alston of the Courting Happiness podcast. Have you checked out our Happiness Library? It's a carefully curated library with books that I highly recommend that are a must for your happiness library. Go to drcourtneyalston.com/happiness library. That's drkortneyalston.com/happiness library. The authors you will hear on the podcast can also be found in our Happiness Library. You can also purchase their books on our site. On top of that, your purchase also helps this podcast and the mission of courting happiness. Let's spread happiness and the word. Check out books on the Courting Happiness Library. It will not only change your life, but it can also help you with your next chapter too. Let's get back to the podcast. Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 64. I'm Dr. Courtney Alston. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy that you're here. We have an incredible expert that will transform your life. She's known as a magical manifester. Yes, I said it, magical manifester. But before that, her day job was as a Homeland Security Attorney. Now, she's a happiness coach and inspirational speaker. Meg Nocero is the author of Butterfly Awakens, a memoir of transformation through grief. She shares the loss of her beloved mother's breast cancer battle, as well as her grieving process and personal metamorphosis. I will tell you, you're going to be inspired by all things Meg in terms of her story, her message, and just her transformational wisdom. She is simply phenomenal. So let's dive in. So, Meg, I have to admit, I have been so super excited about having you on the podcast today and the work that you're doing in regards to grief and transformation, as well as the fact of giving us permission to go through the process. There's so many beautiful dynamics with you. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you so much. It's already a pleasure. And I just literally met you, but I feel this is an incredible energetic space where my message can be heard as well as go where it needs to go. So this is amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, for those of you that are listening, Meg and I just logged in and, you know, I talk about this all the time. I use Zoom. I love using Zoom because I love having an opportunity to see guests. So before I even hit record, Meg and I were already having this great conversation. And I go, okay, this is going to be a really great transformative talk because we already started as soon as we said hello. So this is going to be fantastic. Your book, The Butterfly Awakens, and it's your memoir, really talking about the transformation as it relates to grief and the loss of losing your mother, right?
Yes.
Tell us as it relates to creating the book, what made you decide? Because grieving in itself, and I talk about this very often on the Courting Happiness podcast, my experiences with grief, but what made you decide in terms of the courage inside of yourself to write about it? Because that in itself is a very, very powerful dynamic in terms of writing about the grieving process.
So the real beginnings of this book truly came from my need to heal. And one of the things that I used to heal that cathartic process was writing and journaling. And I found myself so desperately at a loss where I was that I had to grab onto something to bring me through, because I felt very desperate, and that's not a really wonderful place to be. So if you don't have tools, you don't feel like there's any lights there, then, no telling what you'll do. And I really did feel at that point in time that there's no way I'm getting out of this alone. And one of the things I was told is, because I had such an intimate relationship with my mother, it was a really incredible bond. And it hadn't always been like that. My mother was a force of nature. She was very much strong-minded, good strong-minded Italian woman who wanted her girls to be independent, strong-minded women who could go out into the world and do their thing. And that's not necessarily easy when, especially, you show up creative, because you just want to play in the creative magic of the world. And I don't know, I used to love to draw dresses and build Barbie doll homes. And, that was good when I was a little girl. But as I grew, up, she's like, you have to start thinking about education and this, that, and the other, and focus and focus and focus and discipline, drive. So for me, it was like, I want to be the creative, magical one. And yet that's not where my mother was guiding us. So anyway, back to the point, it took us a long time to get to a place where we both were accepting each other for where we were. I certainly did the things that were expected of me. I became a lawyer. I went and got my master's. I went to college. All of those things, got my job, et cetera. But I think at a certain point in time, she started to see me differently, as if, for the person that I showed up as, rather than the what, was expected of me. And one of the coolest things was that we used to have this incredible conversations together where we would play in the meaning and purpose of life, and reading all sorts of different wonderful books and contemplating, the world differently. And for me, when she left this world, I was like, well, who's going to be there to have those conversations? And it really felt like a cutting off. It was really quite painful, because I wasn't prepared for it. I don't think you can ever really be prepared. But for me, when I was told I need to connect to my mother as if she were still here, because just because you go from as Wayne Dyer says, the now here to the nowhere, it doesn't mean that you're not everywhere. And I could still have those conversations if I was open to it. So I started channeling what she would tell me or teach me, and having conversations in a different realm, which became journal entries, which became insights of the day, which became all of a sudden my story. And I just felt that for me to pull myself out of such a dark place, I wanted to offer this as a bit of hope and inspiration for anyone who found themselves where I was, because I didn't find anything specifically relating to that when I was looking for answers, and why am I feeling like this, and why have I feel so lost and without my champion any longer. And I said to myself, I'm going to write a story. I'm going to write my memoir about this, and I have to have a happy ending. And not that my ending is like tied up in a bow. It's not. The book, it opens up, and let me tell you, there's no ending to that evolution, to that unfolding of the people we're supposed to become in our lives. But for me, it showed me that there is hope in the transformation if you allow it, and don't give up ever on yourself, because there's always a light, maybe by virtue of seeing someone else's, like you, Dr. Courtney, you're a beautiful light. Maybe by seeing that, someone has hope that they can take another day, while it doesn't feel so much like that. But, go to bed, rest, and then wake up another day with an opportunity to become or do or experience life differently. So my telling of the story, and I wanted to be honest because I didn't have that experience. I didn't know what to expect watching my mother die. And that whole, wow, very slow process, very much desperate process. And then at the end of that, waking up to, what do I do now? Like, where do I go now? And what do I have within me that needs to come out so that I can grab myself and move myself forward? And that's what I really did hope to share with anyone who was sitting where I was at the beginning of my memoir, in a closet, crying every day. And not to say I stayed there, I went to work. I showed up to the world, I had to paint my face and show up anyway, but it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one angel who enters my life at a time, and you turn around, kind of in awe of what you've done and where you've come from and where you're going.
It's interesting you say that, because that's why I said, gosh, there's so much courage to write about that process, because when you're dealing with grief, or when you're literally going through the process, I always like to say growing through the process of grief, right? It has so many different challenges. And you mentioned earlier going to work, right? And, I will say that I shared this with Meg before. I told you we had like this full-fledged conversation before the podcast, and I told her about when I was a widow and when I was working my dream job as a television reporter in Philadelphia, and I lost my late spouse. And I mentioned how how I went through that process. But what we didn't have a chance to talk about was the fact that I think it was maybe my second or third week. I returned back to the newsroom after bereavement leave, right? And I think the first story I covered was a funeral. And
it's like, here's the knife, just stab me. It's like, God, really? This is not happening.
I'm like, well, okay. I'm still, this is an interesting first day.
Yeah,
right?
That is quite interesting. That is.
So, for me, I will say, like, I was, there was when I look back on it, as challenging as it was, and I don't pretend to kind of just ease through the suffering, right? Because the suffering was real. I talk often to friends how I couldn't listen to the radio when I was going through this, and here I am, a broadcaster, partly because my late spouse was a DJ, and music I kind of attributed to him, or I kind of thought of him, right? But I say all that to say is, going through that process or growing through it is so challenging. How did you, because here you are, a prominent attorney, how do you grow through that? How do you continue to show up even though you're going through the whole process of grieving?
I have to say, I'm a very rebellious person at heart. Like, if people say I can't do things, I show up and I'll do it just in spite of everyone else. But as far as showing up is concerned, one of the things I will say that really was a challenge is that, what if I showed the world what really was happening? Like that messiness, like that really kind of like, I'm a mess. I was like, I'm a mess. I was like, it. And I tell the stories in my book. I literally drove to my office, having an anxiety attack because of the post-traumatic stress that I was dealing with after watching my mother die. I was a mess. And I was afraid. And I think that this makes it more stressful. I was afraid to show my mess, because what would happen to my career that I built year after year, I'm proud about, is showing the world like how I can do things. What was going to happen to me in that respect? Because something happened externally to me, something very profound, like my mother dying, and then just me falling apart. I couldn't show up the same way. I couldn't show. So for me, going through the grieving process, I will say this, I felt initially very alone because I was afraid to share what was happening to me outside my family. And my family saw it and they're like, you got to pull it together. But they don't understand. When you say that, it's very shaming because sometimes you just have to walk through it before you can pull it together, right? So one of which is really a beautiful lesson that I have learned and that I will do for others, is I will honor the space they show up in. If you are a mess and you can't pull yourself off the floor, then I just might sit by your side and say, I'm here for you. How do you want to show up? This is you. Okay, this is you today. It might not be tomorrow. It might be for a month. It might be for more. The grieving process is not linear. We all know that, right? If you've gone through it, it's not linear. And I would hope that myself, I will offer acceptance in a way that will help someone else heal. And I go back to the point of how did I have the courage to go forward in a different way? Well, I'm not sure I would say I had the courage at the outset because I was I was in my closet. I had this little dragonfly lamp. And I was like, well, as long as that's on, I'm good. So I bartered with life, right? As long as the light was on, then I could handle today, right? And then I would come back to myself, okay, the light's still on, so I can go. I played with those symbolic, tomes that, for a lot of us, we can see them as talisman, crosses, like something that you look up to, something you can pray to or hold on to. It's very powerful in the mind, body, spirit mentality because, we all want to trick ourselves into understanding that just get me through today, right? And then build on that. And I think courage is, comes from your heart. The word coraje, core is heart. I do think that there was something greater than me. I had children. I have children. My daughter was 2. My son was 8. There was really no way I could look myself in the mirror if I checked out for them. So I think I became more of a fighter, more rebellious, perhaps, kind of okay, let's do this my way. Let's do this my way. Let me figure out my way, which I think is huge. I think that people, when they actually show up in your own lane, aligning to your authentic self, it's really empowering. And that's your whole message, is to empower, right?
Absolutely.
Through happy and inspiration, and when you're feeling that low, little bits of, sparks of hope there and here and there and there, it really is empowering over time.
I love so many things that you're sharing. When you talked about sparks of hope, and it's interesting. Last night, my fiance and I were driving, and I every time I pass by this sign in our community, is a street sign that says "New Hope." And it speaks to me so much because when we think of hope, right, I'm like, wow, that's true. This is new hope. Yeah. What type of new hope do you feel that you learned through the level and the transformation of grieving?
Oh, wow. That's a great question, Dr. Courtney. There's always something new that we can hold on to every day if we start looking for it. And I am a big believer in signs. And I love that you pass a literal sign as you drive through your neighborhood, because they're they're reminders every day. They're reminders to each of us that if we're paying attention to the world around us, there's always going to be little sparks of hope, like I spoke about. And like, for instance, if I get if I'm feeling particularly low, which happens still, obviously we're all human. We live in this world in 2021, which is not necessarily easy, especially with some of the news that's coming at us. You're like literally shocked at some of the things, and your belief in the rights and wrongs of the world could be shattered on a daily. So it's kind of like, okay, this doesn't seem right. And you have to explain some of that stuff to your children too, which is another thing that you're just like, I'm teaching them a certain way of right and wrong, and the whole blown up, right? Mind blown. So what I will say is that I will constantly be looking, especially when I need it the most, for those little signs that appear that make this all worthwhile. And what does that mean to me? Worthwhile. Okay, well, I think that we're all looking for our own uniqueness and our own, what makes us come alive to the highest versions of ourselves. I think that is when you see shiny people, those are the people that understand that they have something to offer this world in service to something higher, right? And one of the greatest things, for me, I have a mantra practice too. I love it when I remember, because sometimes I don't remember. When I get up in the morning, I say something wonderful is always about to happen. Are you paying attention? And like you said, you saw my TEDx. So I love the visual of a stage. I love it. I just like excited. I mean, I think all the world's a stage, like Shakespeare said, right?
Yeah.
And what happens on your stage can be created by you. You can write that narrative that'll bring you through, and then look at all the characters that show up. That's exciting to me. Like getting to meet you today with your wonderful, choose happy, what makes you happy inquiry into the world, knowing full well of your expertise. You're a doctor, you're a journalist, you're an award-winning journalist at that. You have these conversations. Wow, what's she going to teach me today? It's that dialogue, that give and take, that you give and receive, the whole karmic circle, that gets me going. And I'm probably going off on a tangent. What gives me new hope?
No, actually, this is great.
Yeah.
This is great because I love the fact, Meg, I really love the fact of your energy, because you literally, radiate. I can hear it in your voice. I see it, which I feel so grateful to be able to see you via Zoom. Since the new world that we live in, right? But you radiate that, and I think that's an important message to share, because when you're going through loss, and when you're going through the grieving process, and you mentioned this in your book in terms of, talking about darkness.
Yeah.
When you go through darkness, and what I love so much about your story is how you embrace the messy. I love that. And you're letting us understand that, hey, it's okay. You're going to go through darkness. But when I look at you and when I see the woman that you are, this phenomenal woman, you exemplify light. So how does a person even go or grow through that process of kind of going through a level of darkness and literally now on the other side of that shining?
It's so funny because I was desperate. I was thinking I was never going to be able to laugh again. Laughter. Oh my God. Laughter. Like, you take it for granted that someone makes you laugh. It's such a beautiful, enlightening, they say laughter is the best medicine. Levitates you. I do know this. The evidence in my life shows, back to the lawyer mind, right? The evidence in my life shows that I've been through some significant challenging things, right? I have, been up against some, and, that others might not see as challenges, but they were for me, because I'm incredibly sensitive. I'm very empathic. I am very compassionate as well. I know that my sensibilities, are at a heightened rate than some people, in my life. And, I'm not going to apologize for that. It is how I was made. I do believe that, by virtue of nature, nurture, it doesn't matter how we show up in this world. We have to honor that. I think as, not, I think it's the shame that you try to put on yourself because you don't show up a certain way can be very debilitating in anybody's healing process. And I think for a lot of times I can't stand for things that bring shame on a person, because I think every person has a beautiful light. And at the end of the day, it's every one of our jobs to, if ours is not bright, to reach out to someone who we know who can help us. And then at the other turn, help someone who needs it as well. So when I am in light, like this is it feels like a sacred space. Mm-hmm. I can shine brighter because you allow me to. Like, I don't feel judgment from you. I see your beautiful smile and you engage me. And, that is a gift. Not everyone can do that. We assume how we show up in the world is how everybody does, but that's not true. That's not true.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if I give myself that permission, then I have to also honor other people's path as well, how they show up in the world, and somehow not limit them as well if they're not exactly like me, which is really challenging, because I don't know if you've ever had an experience. They say that the energy suckers in the room, right? You walk in and you're just like, oh my God, someone help me now, right? Yes. Like, you feel it. You're just like, oh, you need to take a shower after the experience, because you're like, oh, what just happened? What happened? What happened? Yes. You and I know there are people, you're in conversation. I'm sure as a journalist, you met those people a lot. I did in court all the time, right? I was like, oh, Jesus, this is happening here. And I would talk to people like, if I had control of my energy, if I was centered to a point where I had the tools to show up and protect that space and not engage, like, I think everyone has, days, and we have days, right? If you had a bad day, you show up here, it was like, you're just wreaking hell on everybody. It's just like, run for the hills. Here she comes, right? But other days I can show up, encapsulated in whatever light you want to call it. And I don't allow other people to trigger me or turn me into, bring me down. Like they said, at energetic levels, right? They can come up to you, or if you're not feeling strong, you can also go down and meet them there. So back to that whole lightness of being, right? That beautiful, I find when I'm low, I need to surround myself with those people who light my path. And when I'm bright, I invite others to join me. And I will tell you this, that was not the case when my mom died. It was a very dark place. It was scary because I thought I was going to be stuck there for the rest of my life. Healing is a beautiful journey. And I think that there's a lot of learning that you can gain from submitting to the process, trusting the process. Someone told me that 3,000 times, trust the process. And I'm like, oh, just stop. All of you just stop. I don't want to hear it again. If someone says it to me again, and literally on top, when I was getting on the plane to Spain on a Camino, the freaking porter told me, trust the process, because I was freaking out because I was so scared. What am I doing, right? What am I doing? Trust the process.
I love that. Trusting you're so true. Trust the process, because it's teaching us something, right? We're learning lessons along the way. It's interesting because you talked about another incredible being, the late Dr. Wayne Dyer.
Yes.
And his teachings and philosophy, which I hold very dear. And, to me, he was an individual who, really, really valued, understanding your energy, understanding your light, and being able to really think about abundance and how you manifest.
Yeah.
And he was just really so dynamic as it relates to that. So I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
And I say this because there's so many things I want to ask you. And this is one that also resonates as you were talking about Dyer. You led into talking about symbolism.
Yeah.
And there's symbolism in your book. How did you even decide on, because it is so transformative, How did you decide on the symbolism of the butterfly?
Well, in my family, when people die, we always looked for the butterflies. And I actually dedicated a chapter to that, looking for the butterflies. For me, when I see a butterfly, it feels beautiful. It feels light. It feels possibility to me. And, it came to fruition, literally that my mom, I was looking for her butterfly after she died. And then when I started writing it, I kept thinking about the cocoon and whose cocoon? And do you want to go into the cocoon? And the cocoon's a scary damn place, where you just melt into nothing. And, it's a real trust the process, because you don't know what's going to happen at the end. I mean, will they let me out? Will I ever see the world through different eyes? Will I like the world that I see on the other end, knowing something like this? And it's interesting when you write, and especially if you're writing your memoir and the process of that, sitting down, I wanted to write about when she was sick and what I saw, because somehow I wanted to honor my process as I experienced something that really took me out of my comfort zone. I came to that with, okay, Mom, you're not giving into this. We're going to beat this. Inspiration, inspiration, inspiration. Law of attraction, manifesting that, right? But it's even Wayne Dyer had no perfect life. I mean, if you look at him, his story, the reason why he opened himself up to this experience of being a spiritually enlightened or involved person was because of his story with his father and his mother going into foster homes, being left behind, feeling abandoned, and then trying to figure out what the next thing. Went into the military, went into psychology, went into this, and then started writing, and then the whole world opened up. And I've seen him speak in person before, and actually my first title was The Sunrise of My Soul's Bliss, and he saw it, and he signed the back of it, and he said, "This is awesome." And, just being, I find those people that I emulate, I keep my, I guess you would say, the podiums that hold them very low, because they're human beings, right? They're human beings. And we show up in certain ways with our frailties and with our strengths. It's a whole picture. But back to the point of the butterfly, I had a lot of different ideas, and my title initially was not Butterfly Awakens. It was La Bella Farfalla. It was Italian for the beautiful butterfly. Wow. That's the title. Yeah. And it's a beautiful, I think this sounds so beautiful. And I think we were sitting together, and I've always been butterfly, 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 butterfly. I'm a butterfly. I'm a butterfly. I see the magic of the butterflies, until someone told me that they only live for 2 weeks, and that really killed me. But that was another whole. I didn't want to hear that part of the story. But the reality is, It's all temporal, right? We all have different transformative the process. We always are constantly transforming. So it could last for a short time, then you're back into your cocoon again and evolving again. So it's constant. But the butterfly speaks to me because when we fly higher, we see differently. The perspective of the world becomes very more expansive. We see through other people's eyes, perhaps higher, looking down rather than looking straight ahead. There's something more there. So we get outside our own box of what we believe to be the truth, to open up our worlds to possibly what else is out there.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing your Dr. Wayne Dyer story. He is truly a light, and an amazing teacher as it relates to forgiveness and how forgiveness can serve you, right? And I love that you shared your journey as it relates to his work as well. It's interesting because you mentioned earlier channeling your mother.
Yeah.
And I, as a person who I lost my mother in 2016, my mother, also died as it relates to cancer. Your mother, breast cancer. My mother had sarcoma. How do you kind of, because really to me, that's literally keeping your mother alive, right? And it with you, it
Yeah.
really inside of you or within
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And how do you go about channeling your mother and staying true to that?
Sometimes I don't want to because I think she would yell at me. It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is not what I taught you. Or, I think at one point when I was going through the actual grieving process, I heard her say, I raised you stronger than this. You should not be falling apart. You've got so much in you. Why? And so sometimes I'm just like, oh, stop. Just stop. I know. Okay, this is not the best evolution of me right now. This is just a moment in time where I am just going to be just whatever, right? To everybody. Keeping her memory alive. And I think this is something that actually felt kind of a lot of closure when I published this book and it was out there, because I was really scared. And I will tell you the truth. I wanted to bring this book to the fore. I wanted to do it in the way I did it this time because it took 10 years from beginning to end. I felt like, okay, people are going to know that I'm a very vulnerable person. I'm not, like the strong attorney who just like walks into a room and just knows what's going on, whatever. I'm like completely lost, and showing my true colors and showing how, insecure I was, as a kid. And, even as an adult going through this and actually asking for what I needed, I constantly was like, oh my God. And then things happened around me and I was just like, yeah, this is not going the way I want it to go. And I had to make choices that were aligned with the person I wanted to wake up and be, which is when I left my job ultimately. I will, keeping my mother's legacy alive is those little moments in time where I remember her saying, I'm so proud of you. I am so great. I'm so grateful that you are in my life. That to me, to her daughter, and we want to not disappoint our parents, and one of the greatest gifts that I've gotten through this whole process, writing my 3 books, and then now finally my memoir, is the healing relationship between me and my father. I think that because we were not as close, I don't think he got me. I think he was like, he's a cardiologist, he's a jack of all trades, he's a brilliant man. He's constantly reading, constantly inquiring in the world, but he didn't know that about me because I saved it for my mom and not him. But back to the legacy of my mother, his experience missing his soulmate after 45 years of marriage, 50 years of being together, and him, taking on a role without her, and then looking to us, because I have 2 other sisters, as a source of strength to continue on in her honor, because she would not be happy if we didn't do it as a united front, because family was so important to her, and how she presented with families into the world, so important to her. We all are holding this beautiful light in front of us. So the legacy becomes the embodiment of what she taught us, and then turning and making it our own, in our own language, in our own presentation, in our own uniqueness. So it's all 3 of us, my sisters and I, and my dad for that, you build on that beautiful butterfly who she was, coming into your own. And the legacy, who you are, you bring your mother to the world and everyone can see the delight of who she was through you and get to know her through you. It's just the legacy. It's just the continuing circle of life, and how we rise on the shoulders of those giants who brought us into the world. So, it becomes really a beautiful memoriam to those who we love the most.
I love that. I love how uh really living in honor of that person, kind of valuing their strengths, right? In terms of what you've learned from them, and really keeping their legacy, or really their life alive through this legacy, right? In regards to to who they are. You know, it's interesting because so many things that you said resonated with me. My parents were together for 40 something years,
Oh,
but
wow.
in terms of marriage, but together nearly 50 years, right? And you know, when my mother died in 2016, you know, now it's seeing the shifts as relates to how the, you know, how different things are now.
Yeah.
But the value of really the importance and really the strength and the beauty of family. One of the things that also stood out that you shared was when you're talking about your mother and talking about the value of how much she really understood you, right? And it's interesting because when I was going through the loss of losing my mother, I remember a dear friend of mine gave me a call because I texted, you know, and I love in your book how Meg's book is great. She shares emails, texts. I love it because it gives you a chance to really go back in terms of that person's mindset, right? I love that
Yeah.
that you've done that. And I remember texting friends back then, and one of my friends, well, called me, and I remember this. I was in the parking lot of the hospital, and my father had just told me that my mom was transitioning, and my girlfriend called me, whose husband is a clergyman, who really was like my sister throughout the PhD process. That's where we met, and she told me, she goes, I know you may not want to hear this, which I had to brace myself. Because I was
Yeah.
like, oh, she's gonna tell me something.
Your
Yeah.
heart
Like,
stopped.
oh, you know, anytime someone says that to you, you're like, oh
Just like,
gosh,
oh God, here it comes.
am I ready? Right. Yeah. It's like, am I ready? And she says to me, I know this is going to be hard for you to hear, but your mother dying could be a beautiful experience if you allow it.
Oof, wow.
Now, after I got a little angry,
Yeah. I can see that. Like, what does she know?
what? It's
Yeah.
nothing beautiful in this. What are you talking
Yeah.
about? I
Yeah.
can't say goodbye to her. I don't want to say goodbye to her.
Right.
You know,
Right.
here's a woman that told me this, she told me, I don't want to die. I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
but she says, this could be a beautiful experience if you allow it. And I remember when we took her home to peacefully die with the help of hospice, who
Yeah.
I call them angels. They are just incredible beings. And I love that you mentioned angels in your book.
Yeah.
But I say that because I learned so much about myself literally at my mother's deathbed.
Huh.
What was there anything that you learned that that, as you can tell, I embrace anger in that statement,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But she, when I look back on it after time, I think after healing you can. When you're in the midst of it at the
Yeah.
beginning, it's hard to see straight. I'd be very honest with you. But what lesson did you learn?
One of the coolest things that someone told me after the fact when I was going through the whole healing process, because my nervous system went on the skids. I ended up with somatic tinnitus, which is a ringing in your head, and it's kind of maddening. So I had to figure out ways to calm myself in certain way. I've been described as like a Tasmanian devil, kind of, woo, let's go around, like, and I never
Yeah.
sit still very much. And I had to figure out a way to really be calm so I could calm myself. One of the things that I was told in that process was that when you have the honor of watching someone cross over or being present at that side or that wherever, in their space, they have the opportunity to do something beautiful for you on the other side. And
Wow.
for me, hearing that made me feel even more hope because I could see my mother being really awesome advocate for those that she loved on the other side. And whether you believe it or not, whether you believe that there is something beyond the veil or not, it doesn't matter to me. To me, what happened was I felt that I had a rock star on the other side as I continued to walk my journey on this earth. So the gift of what you're saying at being present, because I was by her side with my father and my younger sister when she passed. And plus the visual I got, and you'll see it in the book, one of the visuals I got at her bedside was I was praying over her and I saw this lighthouse and I felt this blue sky around it. And then a burst of light, as if I was being blinded if I had my eyes open, like I would have to cover my eyes. And I felt her say, "Let me go." And clearly she knew I didn't want her to go. Clearly I was like, "Oh no, you don't understand. I'm not strong enough without you. Stay." I'll grab her leg as she's like levitating up to God knows where you go. I'd be like, "No, don't leave me." Don't leave me. I think I was. Yeah. Don't leave me. So like you, yeah. I was holding on with everything I could to keep her soul here with me as a physical being walking the earth with me physically. So I just maybe knew that was going to be really hard for me when she left this place, as well as my husband knew it was going to be very hard for me not to have her with me. But one of the other gifts that I have is the final voicemail that she left me was, "Hi, this is Mom. I'm looking for you wherever you are." And that was something I actually have. I have her voice saying that. So I know she's always looking for me wherever I am, doing maybe crazy things and maybe things that are not so advisable, perhaps, always, with her voice. I always say to my kids, I know you won't necessarily do anything that'll be a game changer and ruin your life, because you'll have my little voice in your ear going, "Do you really want to do that? Do you really?" I will always be by your side. I will always help you. But do you really want to make it really hard for me to do that? I mean, like, no, right? So back to your point with regard to what are the gifts of that experience. When you're going through it, there's no gifts. I don't see any gifts. I'm angry that people would even suggest that. Maybe the fact that they planted that in your brain has you looking for the gifts subsequent to. So basically, you're more likely to pay attention to the unfoldings, and being astonished, like Mary Oliver says with her quote, "Pay attention, be astonished, and tell all about it," which is clearly what you're doing, because I would turn it around and ask you the same thing. You were a journalist. Now you are a purveyor of happiness. You have a doctorate. You're out in the world making a difference and elevating lives in a way that you could not have done had you stayed, interviewing as a journalist. If all these events did not happen, if your husband did not die, you wouldn't have met your fiance, and this whole other light experience in your world, this engagement, so do I know what tomorrow is going to bring? Do I know the next day? No. But what I will tell you is, having gone through an experience losing my mother this way and experiencing the whole otherworldliness, magical, I would even say, one of my favorite quotes is Roald Dahl, watch the world with glittering eyes about you. For those who don't believe in the magic will never see it. And that is it. I believe that there is magic in this world, and I will never give up on that. And I only know that because I never gave up on myself when I was in the darkest place I ever found myself. So, if anyone's out there listening to this and they needed to hear that, they're in a desperate place where they feel like there's no hope for them, I'm here to shine a little light on that, to tell you that, yes, there is hope. And as long as you never give up on yourself and your life, there's a belief that comes from the people who love you that you start to believe yourself, and then the whole world will change. So, but that has to start with increments, tiny little changes, shifts, perhaps hearing me say, I always say at the end of my post, "Butterflies, I believe in you. It's time to dazzle. We need your light." And maybe people said that to me, and happy to share it when I can. I do have my days still. I'm going to be honest. I can't lie. I have hard days. I have days because I feel so strongly, and this is a challenging time. I mean, if anyone's in the world and you're actually paying attention to what's happening, it's a weird time. It's something that, maybe in this echelon, what we're experiencing, no one's seen, but I will say this, having conversations with you, Dr. Courtney, and certainly who knows what kind of ripple effects come from all your conversations, that, shine like this, experience where we can power on together, right? We can do this together. We don't have to do it alone. That's really exciting for me, where those minds, those like-minded people come together. And I think the legacy of my mother, she'd be very proud of that. And,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I can say that I'm proud of that.
I love that. I love that power on. I see that in terms of literally a switch. And
Yes.
for us to kind of power on and be this incredible light, in terms of not just being in terms of one, but really kind of standing as it relates to many. I love that as it relates to the whole dynamic of powering on.
There'll be lighthouses. Like how be lighthouses. All of us lighthouses, right? Find the lighthouse.
I love
find
that.
it.
Yeah, I love the visual with the lighthouse, because that is because a lighthouse, in terms of kind of welcoming you. I will say this, because I grew up looking at Guiding Light.
Oh yes.
And that's opera. That beautiful lighthouse.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when I think of a lighthouse, I refer back to Guiding Light. But one of the things I remember is seeing that beautiful light and thinking about, the whole dynamic of the soap opera, people coming in and families being together, and kind of that warming dynamic as relates to it. So I'm glad you gave us that visual as it relates to that. Meg, I mentioned how she's a prominent attorney, but she is a former Homeland Security Attorney. And for those of you who are listening, because she shares so many different elements of her journey in terms of loss and as it relates to her, the beauty of her mother and the beauty of her family. I'm curious, Meg, what do you say to a person who is not just dealing with the transition of a parent or a loved one or a spouse, but the loss has now kind of moved them like it has moved us, right? As you mentioned, my life as a journalist, now I'm a happiness scholar. Your life as an incredible attorney. And now here you are, this, global speaker and author, so someone is listening to us right now who's thinking about that book and that story inside of them. Yeah. What is your advice as it relates to making that transition as they are still grieving through and growing through the transition of a loved one?
Wow. Well, so if they're thinking about writing their story, I say go for it. I definitely think that there's someone out there who's waiting for you to share if you feel compelled to do so. I think your story can change someone's life beyond your even imagination. You'll never know unless you start writing it. And also, I like the metaphor of writing your own child. Like I feel right now in my particular unfolding, I'm at the beginning of a new chapter in my life. And it's really kind of exciting as well, terrifying, because everyone knows beginnings can be, but you've got to start somewhere, right? So I've finished a lot what I started. I have my, oh God, if you guys would see my list, like that is the thing that kind of guides me, is I like mapping out my things, right? I have a list from here to there, and I will follow through, and don't tell me I can't do it, because I will do it. And that makes me for me, the manifester that I want to be in my life, right? So, but I am really at the beginning of a crossroads, and I get to say, what's next? Okay, so I say you're asking yourself the what's next. Maybe you take a moment or many moments, or however you honor that, and really sit with that question. Well, you've got to know where you've come from to know where you're going. And I think when you start talking about telling your story, that's a really amazing experience, because that puts onto paper where it is that you've come from. And it really empowers the where you're going. And I can say this, finishing that last page, it took me until December of 2020 to really write the choose faith over fear chapter in my epilogue, right? I wanted to make sure that I knew, as far as a placeholder, that was what guided me on, the choose faith over fear, because I can get sucked into the fear. I always laugh about this because I'm not sure it's really true, but I'm a recovering hypochondriac. So if I start to plant those seeds in my mind of terror, and I can't go to horror movies, I can't. I just feel like there's going to be the Walking Dead walking past me. And I don't know. It's just like somehow it shows up and it's like terrifying. And I'm like, why would I do that to myself? Even though the adrenaline goes and you're like heart pumping, woo, I can't. I can't do it. I can't do it. Like, especially when there's arms chopped off and I can't, because it's too visual for me. I'm very visual. So I know that, and I know my limitations. So if I want to start the next chapter in a way that aligns with this beautiful vision that I have of where I'm going, I do my best to detach from toxicity that doesn't serve me, like figuring out what that is, looking and speaking my truth to those who I love, so they know what I stand for and what I'm looking for, and to see whether they can support me and I can support them on their journey, really that honoring. But I do believe that whole what's next can be really empowered by telling your story of where you've been. And I think that the where you've been is going to inspire so many people and empower so many people to say, then there's nothing wrong with me either. Right? There's nothing wrong with my path. I love this. My friend Tetta says it all the time. We will not die of terminal uniqueness, right? Everyone has many different renovations or renditions of that story, right? That hero's journey that, ended up where God only knows. Soap operas. Let's talk about soap operas. What are they built on? Really, really blown up versions, dramatic versions of everyday life. I mean, have you heard some of the conversations your friends are having lately? I would say, I love it. Great dicta for great story. Sometimes you don't want to live it, but at least if you have it, you've got great antagonists and you've got great protagonists and you have all sorts of life and love and laughing and just living, which, is the greatest opportunity that you can possibly have, the opportunity to live the life of your dreams, whatever that looks like to you. So if you're looking to write a book, start. Just allow that whatever beauty to come through your hand onto the paper, channel it. One of the greatest tools I ever used was The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron's Creative Recovery, where every morning, 3 pages longhand, they call it the morning pages, and just see what story comes out of you. And then you can start putting it together. Like even NaNoWriMo right now is the National Association of, for November is Writing Month, right? So they're all like, sit down and write your novel in a month, right? I did try to do that, but I'm just blocked. Right now, it's not, the words aren't coming in a 50,000 page or 50,000 word book. So I honor that. I know where I am. So at least I know what I'm capable of right now. So I don't shame myself. I can't shame myself.
I love that. I love that you don't shame yourself. It gives us permission to be kinder to ourselves and really to value practicing self-compassion.
I will say this, Dr. Courtney, I do shame myself, but I don't want to do that any longer because it doesn't serve the beauty that is in me. And, that's a habit. That's a habit, unfortunately, one that we all know too well, the judgment, the critique, the I'm not good enough, I'm less than. But that's why I use a lot of affirmation practices to build myself up and to lay different neural pathways in my brain that says, I am more than enough. And you know what? I walked 77 miles in 6 days on a sprained ankle. I'm friggin' BA, right? I'm a awesome, sort of person. So if anyone tells me that, someone said to me once, you're going to laugh. So the Camino is a spiritual pilgrimage, right? And at the end of my book, the last chapter is all about the transformative process in the Camino. And I actually came back from the Camino. So I know my truth. So I know that I want to stay in a hotel that has a bathtub at night. And I didn't want to stay in a hostel. I'm 50 years old now. I was 40 when I left, but I was 40 something when I went. But, the bottom line was I don't want to make this even harder than I need to make it because it's going to be hard as it is. So they took my luggage with this Waze group and they moved it at night. So I only carried a backpack on my back. So I came back and I told my story. And then someone said to someone else who was going and they did the backpack and they went that way. Oh, you did it right, to this girl. So this other person, I go, honey, did you finish it? You did. Guess what? I did too. We all get to where we're going in our own way. So honor that way. And then at the end, you'll see that it's not the destination, it was the journey. And my journey was well hard enough. Just my backpack, forget about all the stuff. And I'm so grateful that I gave myself the tools to succeed. And at that, I can sit back and the knowing that, I'm going to always show up like myself. I am always going to show up and honor my own bray of my heart, because, I don't need to please anybody else but myself at the end of the day.
But I love that. I will tell you, Meg, I love how honest you are. Because, as you mentioned earlier, when I was talking about, shame, because that can be very easy for us to do when we are, not practicing kindness to ourselves, because it happens. It happens, and it can happen. And some of us are better at it than others. But I love the fact that you are giving so many of us, empowering so many of us with permission for it to be okay, for it being a process, and for you to thank you for sharing that journey with us in regards to accepting the fact that all of our process or our path will look different, and it's okay. It is okay. But, just kind of practice some self-compassion, along the way. I knew this was going to be a transformative conversation.
Oh my God,
this is part I continually say I hate. One day someone's going to edit like some video of me and go say, she always says, I hate this part. I hate wrapping up conversations, but I love the fact that we've connected. I love all the information that you've shared. For the listeners who are listening, who are saying, wow, okay, I have a book inside of me, or someone who's suffering loss, who just lost a loved one who is coping through, how can they find you? Where is the best place to find Meg?
So I'd like to say, like a butterfly, I'm everywhere. But we haven't been able to elevate like Star Trek. We can't take ourselves to where you are. So you can find me on the internet. I have a webpage. It's Meg Nocero, Nocero.com. They can find me there. My book's available wherever books are sold, on Amazon and all sorts, bookshop.com and all sorts of book stores. Also, Facebook, please contact me on Facebook. I post daily mantras. Today, it's pay attention to the signs. That was my mantra today, because I saw a hawk this morning.
Love it.
And the symbolism of a hawk, how, leadership and higher intuition, and you follow that, and I love signs. So I'll go back to your point before, I love to do a mantra every morning to center my mind and get it fine-tuned for the day. And usually when I don't start that way, I'm a mess. Instagram, LinkedIn, I'm there. I offer coaching as well for people who are going through career transition or even life transition, as far as, moving from a situation where you're feeling really, desperate and stuck. And I always say, I don't insert my vision for your life. I kind of bring you to your focus and your intention, so we can map a guide for you, a wonderful way that you will show up in your life, basically aligned to who you are. So I do that as well. And I keep standing open to the opportunities of life. So, who knows where I'll show up again, and definitely happy to be here with you, Dr. Courtney. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and you are a light. I can see it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed every bit of this conversation with you, Meg. And for those of you who are listening, Meg's information will be on her episode page of this podcast. So you can also purchase her book on our website. So definitely make sure you purchase The Butterfly Awakens. It's truly a transformative journey in regards to loss. And also, I really treasure this conversation because of the level of light that you just exude, Meg. Now, this is a question I ask everyone before they leave the podcast, because here you are, just an incredible being in terms of, Maya Angelou has that saying, phenomenal woman. You exemplify being a phenomenal woman. You truly are.
Maya in the same. So I
admired all things Dr. Angelou. She's just an incredible being. But here you are, you've gone from being a former Homeland Security attorney. Now you're an author, a speaker. You spread happiness with the world. You have multiple books. You're a mom, you're a wife, you're a sister, you're a friend,
Yes.
right? There's a lot of hats to have. How do you commit to your well-being and your happiness journey? What does that even look like for someone who's wearing as many hats as you are? Because I know that there's listeners out there who are like, you know what? Wow, yeah, I'm wearing a lot of hats too. So how do you go about committing to your well-being and your happiness journey?
I truly love the question because it's something that I'm really contemplating, especially as we move into 2022. And I think that, it's an opportunity, before my month of December is magic and miracles. So I always like to get myself ready. December 1st is my birthday. So it's kind of always like my next
Happy
trip around the sun.
birthday.
I always like to get prepared to see like how I want to show up. And I always theme my years. I theme them, right? Talk about wellness. So this last year was about effortless joy. And in many respects, I will say this, it has been a year of effortless joy just by virtue of being able to be present, having these conversations with people like you, and reaching out beyond my own what I would see as my own world, into other places. But I want to say this, one of the things that I'm looking to do better than ever is fine tuning back to basics that really work for me, so that effortless joy can somehow, go into the next year. And for me, so meditation has always been a challenge for me. One of the things that is not a challenge for me, and probably where I wrote the majority of my books, is I ride a stationary bike every morning. And what happens is it calms my brain because I'm in motion. Remember, I told you I'm constantly moving.
Yes.
So I have been committing 30 minutes a morning, either to that or a Peloton or something that gets me, my brain calms it down, because I have to just move my body. And they say contemplative prayer when you walking meditation is huge, because it gets your body to calm down by emitting those endorphins from the movement. At the same time, you can receive so much insight. So that is one thing, but also like a self-care Friday. Yesterday was my self-care Friday. Remember that there are things that we love as women to feel fun and pretty, and that's important at any age or any stage of your life, to show up as beautifully you. And when you do take care of yourself in the smallest ways by, setting aside 30 minutes, a day to move in any way or shape or form, or get your nails done, or get your hair done, or, I don't know, but just whatever works for you, those basics that work for you, that make you feel like you can stand taller and, be present in the world, proud of who shows up with you, right? Proud of what you show. So that is my very long explanation as to what I'm going to do. And I think that elevates the happiness factor. And that's something that you look into. And, certainly step away from engaging in anything that's really hard when you're not feeling up to it, right? So honoring where you are, how you show up. I mean, certainly you can run away from people that trigger you if you're like gonna really like it's gonna make you angry. I often said this when I was at my job. I said, not today. You don't want to meet the Meg that's gonna show up in front of you if you keep going. That's the prosecutor in me, right? Not today. Warning. And the only people who don't heed my warnings are my children. Warning. All right, we're going there. Anyway.
I love it. I love it in terms of giving yourself permission. I love it as it relates to seeing what you need to do in terms of kind of just, just being able to quiet yourself, right? To kind of be still with yourself. Yeah. And I love everything that you shared as it relates to really helping to transform our lives through your extraordinary journey. Thank you so much for inspiring us today. You are indeed a phenomenal woman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Courtney. And so are you. You absolutely are. And that beautiful smile could light up a room. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg. Thank you for being here today. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. That's podcast@drkortneyalston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.